In the previous video, we looked at where we're heading as far as our HSC outcomes go. We also looked at some definitions for ethics, bioethics, and Christian ethics. This video is going to look at the key ethical guidelines or principles for Christians that assist them in modifying or changing their behavior according to Christian principles. These principles help to clarify what is right and what is wrong, what Christians should freely do, and what Christians should refrain from doing. It's best first to have a look at these guiding ethical principles or teachings. Freeze the video now and have a read through each of these key ethical teachings. Some of them will be very familiar to you and you will know already where they come from. There are three approaches used by Christians to develop these ethical principles that I've just outlined for you. One is natural law, authority, and the last approach is situational ethics. Firstly, we'll look at natural law. It's important to remember that this approach to ethical teachings is only implemented by the Catholic Church. Underpinning this approach of natural law to bioethical teachings is this principle that God creates human beings with a common human nature, and actions that go against this nature are intrinsically evil. Where does this principle come from? If we go back to Genesis in the Hebrew Scriptures, right at the beginning, God said, "Let us make humans in our image, in our likeness." This is really crucial because when God created the heavens and the earth, He put the pinnacle of His creation, that's us, in the center of His garden. This claim by Jewish and Christian adherents that God created men and women in His image and in His likeness is a very powerful thing for a religion to assert, because it means that there is an element of the divine within us, that we are the result of God's creative power, and therefore, by virtue of that, we are sacred. And so when Adam and Eve were created and placed in the Garden of Eden, there was a sense that nature was perfect. God's creation of humanity was perfect, and humans had a particular relationship with God because they were created in God's image and in God's likeness. And if we have a look at a couple of quotes, we look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. "So God created mankind in His own image. In the image of God He created them. Male and female He created them." Take note, it's God that is doing the creating. We didn't create ourselves. Our God is a creator God. And if we are made in the image and likeness of God, what responsibility do we have to this body, our own body that God has given us? The implication is that life is sacred, and therefore it must be protected and safeguarded. This teaching or principle or guideline of stewardship applies here. Similarly, Genesis chapter 1, verse 31, "God saw all that He had made, and it was very good." Again, God created everything. We are not God. And also note that what God creates is good. So if you have a look at these two quotes, in bioethics, how does this impact on the life of the Christian adherent? Just going forward a little bit to the New Testament, in Paul's letter to the Romans, this is where we really see this notion of natural law coming through. They show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts. So learn the references and these quotes off by heart, because they're important quotes that you will be including in your essay if you want to refer to Catholicism and their approach of natural law in developing ethical principles for Christians to use as guidelines for their everyday behaviour in their everyday lives. These quotes raise some very important questions for Christians. What does it mean to be created in God's image and likeness? It means that all life, from the moment of creation to the natural death, is a product of God's creative power, and that we are filled with God's life through the Holy Spirit. And if that's the case, we can't go mucking around with something that God has created in His own image. Why? Because that would be sinful. That would go against this natural order of things that are ordained by God. Interestingly, the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle held that the virtues such as justice, charity, and generosity, just to name a few, are natural dispositions inherent within human nature. To act in ways that benefit the persons possessing them and that person's society. And Thomas Aquinas was influenced by this work of Aristotle. He said that human life was lived in the context of a divinely created order. All aspects of nature were part of this order of creation, and the moral life consisted of living out this order for the glory of God and the fulfillment of the person. The point of morality was to fulfill the purpose of human life created by God. So according to this principle, to take action that disrupts this natural order of things divinely ordained by God is to actually do evil. So according to Aquinas, actions that are good support this divine order of things, whereas actions that interrupt or go against that divine order are evil. There are some problems with natural law. Thomas Aquinas used Aristotle's philosophy. What it means to be human has changed significantly. So therefore, it's quite difficult to apply approaches where we are at in society today, because our understanding of what it means to be human has changed significantly. This brings to mind our preliminary studies on the nature of religion. We know that a religion is dynamic and living when it is able to change and adjust without compromising its central beliefs, and it is being practiced today. Also, natural law tends to allow little room for context or situation, though it has a great advantage of providing absolute moral rules. For example, certain actions are wrong and certain actions are right. This provides some believers with a great sense of security that they might be standing on the right hand of God. However, these moral absolutes might not leave a lot of room for compassion and empathy or any kind of grey area that looks at the context in which that person has sinned. This idea that our creation is so closely linked to God means that not only is all creation sacred, but we've been given a particular stewardship over creation and over ourselves, our own bodies. So much so that we can't make decisions that are independent of the divine within us. Guiding Christian principles that arise out of these quotes from Genesis and Romans and the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas are: God is the creator of all and Lord of the world. We are made in the image and likeness of God. The sanctity of life and stewardship. It needs to be remembered, though, that Christian variants interpret these guidelines in very different ways, and the teaching authority or magisterium of those different Christian variants would guide their followers or their adherents in different ways that would reflect those interpretations of those key guiding ethical principles.